Let me tell you a prison break story tonight. I've told my own prison break story many times before, but never anyone else's. Just the other day, I shared a story about someone else's prison break, and it's actually quite thrilling. So sit back, and I'll take my time telling it. This story took place in November 1985. Funny enough, that timing was almost the same as when I broke out. Mine was probably a little later, around Christmas that same year, 1985. I reckon these guys were all locked up back in 1984. The story is set in Heilongjiang, up in northeast China, specifically at Baiyun Prison. I wonder if any folks from the northeast have heard of Baiyun Prison? Back in the day, the father of one of the infamous two Wangs, either Wang Zongwei or Wang Zongfang, was detained right here at Baiyun Prison. That's where this story unfolds. First off, I should say a bit about this prison. The three inmates who tried to break out in this case were truly driven to it. In fact, a lot of prison break cases happen because the prisoners have no other choice, and I'll share more stories like this later. Even prison breaks can be forced. Who would have thought? I don't know if this topic is sensitive, but I suspect it might be. Anyway, let's start with the guards. Most prison guards back then were former soldiers. After being discharged or transferred from military service, they'd either become police officers at local stations, work in public security bureaus, take jobs as prison guards, or serve as security officers in some company's security department. That was basically the typical career path for them. So what did these guards do all day? They were pretty much like warehouse keepers. They had no real authority. Their only job was to make sure prisoners didn't escape. As long as there were no riots or escapes, their daily duties were done, and they could clock off. But a lot of these guards had a terrible habit. They loved beating prisoners. I've said this before. Remember that story I told about the guard at the detention center I was in? The one who got shot dead and whose wife was also killed. He used to amuse himself by tormenting prisoners every time they were let out for exercise. The exercise period was basically his time to beat people up. Baiyun Prison was a place for serving sentences, not a detention center or a holding facility. All the inmates there were convicted criminals doing hard labor. That's how it worked. And the guards there were especially brutal when it came to beating prisoners. I guess they basically took pleasure in it. Whenever something went wrong at home or they were in a bad mood, they'd take it out on the prisoners. You could say it was normal in a twisted way. They just enjoyed inflicting pain. This kind of violence was common in prisons, and many prisoners were scared to death of it. The guys in this story were so terrified of being beaten that they thought, screw this, we might as well break out. Imagine how bad the beatings must have been. It wasn't just a few slaps. It was torture, pure and simple. In China, talking about human rights is a joke, especially for prisoners behind bars. The word human rights doesn't apply to them at all. They don't even have basic personal safety, so how can we talk about human rights? Honestly, I don't know how to put this. I guess I've gone off track here. Back to the guards. Whenever they had a bad day or something upset them, they'd take it out on the prisoners. There were plenty like that. Let me give you an example. When I worked in Qinghai, there was an office clerk at our unit, a civil servant who just sat at his desk doing paperwork. He was a real oddball. Every break time, teachers would gather in the office to chat, and sometimes arguments would break out. Whenever these arguments riled him up, he'd storm home right away. This guy's surname was Zhang, and we called him Teacher Zhang. When he was upset, his way of letting off steam was bizarre, so bizarre I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but I have to for the story. Whenever he got worked up during those office arguments, he'd rush home, grab his wife, who was a housewife, and just beat and assault her mercilessly. That was his idea of venting. At first, we had no idea what he was doing when he left abruptly. But after a while, we figured it out. We were all young back then, so we followed him once to see what he was up to, and that's what we heard through his front door. So you can see, that's the kind of person he was. Now, back to the guards at Bayonne prison. Let me clarify one thing. Are prisoners allowed to drink alcohol while serving their sentences? Strictly speaking, no, this rule applied even at detention centers. Even though they were doing labor reform, drinking was prohibited. I've always wondered why that rule existed. What harm would a little alcohol do? Our country has always been weird about stuff like this. Ever since the Cultural Revolution, we've been conditioned by poverty and hardship. If you liked drinking or eating meat, people would look down on you like you were some kind of degenerate, especially in the 1960s and early 1970s. Back then, liking good food and drink was seen as a character flaw. You weren't a good person. But wait, look at our top leaders. Didn't Zhou Enlai drink Maotai all the time? Was he a bad person? Of course not. He was one of our most beloved leaders. But that's just how it was back then. Now, at Bayonne prison, there were 3 inmates who became friends: Guo Chang, Ma Hongsan, and Wang Xueli. Their names sound pretty imposing, don't they? Ma Hongsan's name has a tough ring to it, while Wang Xueli sounds more scholarly. The 3 of them were tight. Guo Chang was locked up in 1983 for a minor offense, probably a fight or armed robbery with a knife, or assault with a weapon. He was sentenced to death, but because he was so young, he was under 17 when he was arrested, they commuted it to death with reprieve. He ended up serving his sentence at Bayonne prison in Heilongjiang. By 1985, 2 years later, his death sentence with reprieve was reduced to life imprisonment. I need to get the timeline straight here. Then there was Ma Hongsan. He was a tough guy too, locked up in 1983 with a 17-year sentence, which is a long time for what was probably a petty crime. He was about the same age as Guo Chang. Both were under 20, just 19 years old, in 1985. The only one who was a bit older was Wang Xueli, who was 24 in 1985. Wang Xueli was imprisoned for theft in 1984 and given a 15-year sentence. All 3 of them were staring down the barrel of long prison terms, and they stuck together like glue. In prison, you either join a gang or you're alone, and these 3 were inseparable. But being young men, they had their flaws. They'd mess around, break prison rules, and get into fights. It was par for the course. So they were often thrown into solitary confinement, where the guards would shock them with electric batons. I bet most of the 200 or so people in this group have never felt the pain of an electric baton. It's not about the voltage, it's about the jolt. One touch, and you're thrown to the ground. You try to stand up, and another jolt knocks you right back down. It keeps going until you can't even crawl anymore. That's how brutal those batons were. The guards would stand there in the cell, zapping the prisoners over and over until they were whimpering and obedient. And the guards got a sick thrill out of it, let me tell you. I've loved fighting since I was 18. If I didn't get into a brawl for 3 days, my hands would itch. Why? Because there's a rush to it, a twisted kind of pleasure. I've even said before that if I went 3 days without fighting, I'd take a train somewhere just to pick a fight. I've told that story before. So most of the inmates at Bayonne prison had been beaten into submission by the guards. It's just like in school. If a teacher wants to find an excuse to punish a student, they'll always find one. If a student talks during class, that's enough. Prisons are the same way. November 8, 1985. It was probably a Saturday. The three guys somehow got their hands on a bottle of liquor and drank it in their cell. Let's be real, when you're stuck in prison for over a decade, a little drink is one of the only joys you have. No women, no fun, just alcohol to numb the pain. And the guards on duty that night probably had a few drinks themselves, so they didn't notice. What harm could a little drinking do, anyway? But as luck would have it, there's always a snitch in the crowd. Someone ratted them out for drinking that night. The three of them had no idea they'd been reported. They thought they'd gotten away with it scot-free. Let me tell you about their prison jobs. The three of them were actually model prisoners. Guo Chang, having had his death sentence commuted to life, was on his best behavior. Apart from that one drinking incident, he didn't get into fights and worked hard. He was even named a model worker, became a work group leader, and didn't have to do outdoor labor. Instead, he was put in charge of the prison warehouse, distributing tools to other inmates. I've never served time in a prison camp, so I don't know if working in the warehouse was a cushy gig or not, but that's what they did. In those days, the guard room, also called the captain's office or the correctional officer's office, was pretty much open to anyone in the prison, as long as you had a reason to be there. The day after they drank the liquor, the snitch reported them. At the time, Wang Xueli was squatting outside the correctional officer's office, washing clothes for the guards. As he scrubbed away, he overheard the guards inside talking. There were about 7 or 8 of them, captains, instructors, all ranks. They were discussing what to do about Guo Chang, Ma Hongsan, and the others who'd been drinking. Finally, the chief captain said, "Charge up all the electric batons. We're going to teach those boys a lesson they'll never forget. We'll beat them within an inch of their lives." When Wang Xueli heard that, his blood ran cold. He couldn't even focus on washing the clothes anymore. He just scrubbed a couple of times, rinsed them quickly, and ran to find Guo Chang and Ma Hongsan. "Guys, we're screwed," he panted. "We got ratted out for drinking last night. I just heard the chief captain say they're going to charge up the electric batons and beat the hell out of us." When the other two heard that, they were stunned like a bolt of lightning had hit them. They'd been shocked with those batons countless times over the years, and they were terrified of them. Wang Xueli, in particular, would shudder just thinking about the pain of that electric jolt. It made his skin crawl. Guo Chang cursed loudly, "Fuck this. I'd rather die than go through that again. What's wrong with having a little drink? We didn't start a riot, we didn't shout slogans. Why do we deserve this? We're going to spend the rest of our lives in this hellhole, and this is the only fun we get? And now we're going to be beaten for it." The three of them were at a loss. Then Wang Xueli, the oldest of the bunch, spoke up. "What choice do we have? We are either going to die here slowly or fight back. Let's kill those bastards. They've got guns, we can take them and break out." Back in 1985, Bayan Prison, like all prisons across the country, had no high-tech security, no CCTV cameras or anything like that. Breaking out wasn't that hard, especially in a labor camp where security was relatively lax. If you really wanted to run, you could do it. Wang Xueli said firmly, "Let's do it, let's rebel. We can't take this anymore. We're looking at over a decade in here, getting beaten every week. We'll never survive it. Let's kill them all and run." The other two agreed. They had nothing to lose, stuck with long sentences like that. So they hatched a plan. They'd strike on November 10th. Here's how it was supposed to go down. Every morning, the prisoners were marched out to work early. But since the three of them worked in the warehouse, they stayed behind to distribute tools. Once all the other prisoners were gone, the prison yard would be empty. That's when they'd make their move. On the morning of November 10th, at 6:30 a.m., all the prisoners lined up to head out to work. Only one guard was left on duty in the guard room, a guy surnamed Zheng, who'd pulled the night shift and was waiting for someone to take over. He went to the boiler room to make a cup of tea. Seizing the opportunity, Wu Chang, Ma Hongsan, and Wang Shuoli rushed to the boiler room and hacked him to death with an axe. After killing him, they quickly stripped off his uniform, and Ma Hongsan put it on, transforming into a guard in an instant. He then sat down at the desk in the guard room, pretending to be on duty. Shortly before 7 a.m., the first guard arrived to take over the shift, a guy surnamed Wang. When he walked in and saw Ma Hongsan sitting there in Zhang's uniform, smoking a cigarette and drinking tea, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. He was so shocked he couldn't move. Before he could react, Wang Shuoli and Guo Chang jumped out from behind the door and hacked him to death with axes too. This time, they got lucky. The guard was carrying a pistol, their first weapon of the day. The guard they'd killed in the boiler room hadn't been armed, probably because he was off duty. With a gun in their hands, they felt invincible. Because let's be honest, when you're breaking out of prison, an axe isn't going to cut it, but a gun? That changes everything. One by one, more guards arrived for work, and one by one, the three men killed them. Next was the instructor, surnamed Zhong. He walked in, saw Ma Hongsan in the guard uniform, and froze just like the last guy. Wang Shuoli and Guo Chang didn't hesitate, they killed him too, hiding his body behind the door. Then came the chief captain, surnamed Hu, the man who'd ordered the electric batons to be charged. He was the most brutal guard in the prison, the one who was best with the electric batons, the guy the prisoners feared the most. But that day, they weren't afraid of him anymore. When Hu walked into the guard room, Ma Hongsan stood up, pointed the stolen pistol at him, and said calmly, "Captain Hu, don't move. Come in, we need to talk." Hu stared at him in disbelief, too shocked to speak. Then he looked down and saw the bodies hidden under the desk, blood pooling all over the floor, gushing out like a river. The sight left him frozen in terror. Ma Hongsan sneered, "Captain Hu, did you ever think this day would come? Did you think about this when you were zapping me with that electric baton? Well, now it's your turn to die." He pulled the trigger, shooting Hu right between the eyes. That was the first shot fired, but not the last. The killings didn't stop there. Any guard who walked through that door was killed. Even other prisoners who came to the boiler room to fetch hot water, since the boiler room was right next to the guard room, were hacked to death to cover their tracks. In just 40 minutes, the three men killed 15 people. Wait, let me count again. No, it was 16? I'm getting confused here. Let me sort this out. 7 guards and 6 inmates who'd come to fetch water. That adds up to 13? No, wait, 7 guards and 9 inmates. I'm losing track, my mind's a mess. Anyway, the numbers don't matter, let's just say they killed a lot of people. 7 guards and several prisoners who got in the way. All the bodies were hidden in the guard room and the boiler room. By this point, the three men were covered in blood. They'd gone completely berserk, killing without mercy, all within that 40-minute window. They ended up with 2 stolen pistols and plenty of ammunition. Between killings, they tried to mop up the blood with mops, but it was useless. The blood kept flowing, seeping everywhere. They couldn't clean it fast enough. Once the killing slowed down, they sat down to plan their next move. They had 2 pistols now. What should they do? Should they escape immediately? They decided to wait for one more guard who was supposed to come on duty. They wanted to kill every last guard before they ran. In the meantime, they kept mopping up the blood, trying to cover their tracks. But then something unexpected happened. Wang Shuoli, the oldest of the 3, the one who'd been imprisoned for theft with a 15-year sentence, was starting to crack. He'd killed more people than he ever imagined, and the guilt was eating him alive. Even though Guo Chang was a former death row inmate, none of them had ever killed anyone before, let alone this many. Wang Shuoli's legs went weak, his face turned pale, and he couldn't take it anymore. Suddenly, he dropped the mop and said to the other two, "Guys, I can't do this anymore. I'm scared. I'm so fucking scared. I want to live. Let's stop, let's surrender. Let's turn ourselves in." Can you imagine what Guo Chang and Ma Hongsan thought when they heard that? They were dumbfounded, staring at him in disbelief, like they'd been struck by lightning. "What did you just say?" Guo Chang yelled. "Surrender? Are you out of your mind? Do you think we can survive this after killing all these people?" Ma Hongsan's eyes turned cold. He was ready to kill Wang Shuoli right then and there. But everything happened so fast. Wang Shuoli didn't say another word. He just kept mopping the blood, his hands shaking. Then he said, "I'm going to rinse this mop out," and walked out of the guard room. But Guo Chang and Ma Hongsan knew he wasn't coming back. They realized he was a liability, and they had to stop him. Ma Hongsan raised the pistol to shoot him, but Wang Shuoli was faster. He dropped the mop and ran for his life. By the time they reacted, he was already gone, sprinting through the prison yard. As he ran straight into a police officer from another squad, a captain surnamed Chui. Wang Shuoli screamed at him, "Officer Chui! Help! Prison break! They're killing everyone! There's a riot!" Now, let's talk about Officer Chui's reaction. Most guards would have called for backup immediately, but not him. He drew his pistol and rushed towards the guard room to check it out, acting on instinct. He had no idea what he was walking into. As soon as he turned the corner, Ma Hongsan, still wearing the guard uniform, shot him dead on the spot. Now the body count was up to 9 guards dead. Guo Chang and Ma Hongsan knew Wang Shuoli had betrayed them. He'd snitched on them, and their plan was ruined. They couldn't catch up to him. He was long gone. So they came up with a new plan. Ma Hongsan would keep wearing the guard uniform, pretend to be a guard, and escort Guo Chang, dressed as an inmate, out of the prison. It was a common practice for guards to take inmates out of the prison for errands, so they figured this disguise might work. If they were stopped, they'd fight their way out. They had 2 pistols, after all. Meanwhile, Wang Shuoli, watching Officer Chui get shot dead, was terrified out of his mind. He kept running towards the 3rd squad's area, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Prison break! Riot! They're killing people!" His shots echoed across the prison yard. Everyone heard him. When Guo Chang and Ma Hongsan walked out of the guard room, they ran straight into a group of prison guards and armed police officers. A shootout erupted immediately. Gunfire rang out everywhere. The 2 men fought their way towards the prison gate, shooting as they went, but they couldn't make it through. There were too many guards and police officers blocking their path. Desperate, they ran into an abandoned steel factory on the prison grounds, a dilapidated workshop or warehouse, and hid there, holding off the authorities. But let's be real, this was a suicide mission. 2 men with pistols against a whole army of armed police? It was like trying to crack a rock with an egg. They stood no chance. Soon enough, they were surrounded by the swarming police force. The authorities tried to negotiate, but the 2 men refused to surrender. In the end, they were both shot and killed in that abandoned steel factory. Now, let's go back to Wang Shuoli, the snitch who'd ratted them out. This guy was a real piece of work, if you asked me. How common are people like him? I don't know, you see them in life, but someone this spineless is rare, even for a snitch. Let's think about this. He was the one who'd proposed the prison break in the first place. He'd been the most eager to fight back. He had the shortest sentence, 15 years, and was the oldest, so he should have been the most level-headed. But after killing a dozen people, and hearing that they planned to kill all the returning prisoners that night, he'd had a mental breakdown. He'd suggested surrendering, thinking he might get leniency. Was he an idiot? Did he really think he'd survive after all that? Maybe he told himself he was forced into it. That's probably what he thought. I'll talk about similar cases later. But if he'd been smart, he could have saved himself. Think about it. Guo Chang and Ma Hongsen were dead. There were no witnesses left. No one had seen him kill anyone. He could have lied, said he was held hostage, that he was forced to watch them kill people, that he'd escaped to call for help. He could have said, "I didn't kill anyone. They held me at gunpoint, and I had to watch them murder those people. I took the first chance I got to run and alert the guards. Officer Cui was the one I ran to. Even though he was killed, I tried to save lives. If you still want to execute me for this, then so be it." At least then, he'd have had a fighting chance. But no, Wang Shueli confessed to everything. He said, "I helped kill people at first, but after the 10th murder, my conscience got the better of me. When I heard they planned to kill even more people, the returning prisoners, I knew I had to stop them. I couldn't let them sink deeper into this madness." But none of that mattered. Confessing didn't save him. He was executed shortly after. This case remains the deadliest prison riot and murder spree in Chinese history. More guards and inmates killed than in any other prison incident. It was a true prison massacre. Okay, that's the end of the story.